Hello, welcome to a new episode of Bilmasri, back after a really busy period. One of the things that kept me a bit busy is a new Instagram and Facebook account, which sort of complements this blog and podcast. The Instagram and Facebook accounts focus on idioms and proverbs in Egyptian Arabic. What I do is I use short clips from Egyptian movies and drama to illustrate how these expressions are used. I put links to those accounts on the blog if you want to find them. The Instagram account is called Bilmasri_idioms. Now, before we do today's reading, I want to briefly touch upon an issue which would be of interest to you if you're learning the Fusha, and that is the continuum on which the Arabic language exists from classical Arabic to the very extreme form of dialect. I didn't come up with this, of course. There was a linguist, an Egyptian linguist called Said Badawi, and he identified 5 sort of levels of Arabic which exist on a continuum. The highest one would be the classical Arabic of the Quran, followed by the contemporary Fusha, which would be used in contemporary novels, newspapers, and so on. And then we have 3 levels of Ammiya or dialect. The highest of that is called Ammiyat al-Muthaqqafin, or the educated spoken Arabic, followed by Ammiyat al-Mutanawwirin, the enlightened sort of spoken Arabic, and then Ammiyat al-Ummiyin, which is the illiterate spoken Arabic, which has barely any influence from standard Arabic. Now, as we said, these exist in a continuum, and the fact of the matter is that any native Arabic speaker who is educated to a certain level will find themselves moving from one level to another throughout the day, depending on the context. So context is very important. So what we have here today, for example, is a media article about the death of Mubarak. It's a newspaper article written in contemporary Fusha. When I tried to convert that to Ammiya, I found myself very often wanting to stick to the Fusha and not wanting to completely resort to Egyptian Arabic. The reason is that the context sometimes requires you to use words that are sort of Fusha. And so if you've been learning Fusha at university or wherever, you may find it reassuring to know that it's very common to use the Fusha that you've been learning in a variety of spoken contexts. So it's not as unusable or as distant from the Ammiya as you may have been told. Sometimes the context demands that you retain some level of Fusha. If you look at the text that I posted on the blog, you will find that alongside the text that I read out, I put some words in brackets and highlighted in yellow. And these are the words in Ammiya that I would have used if I was purely talking in Ammiya. So just as an example, I say, Mubarak أصبح رئيس البلد. أصبح, to become. This is not a word that I would normally use if I was speaking Ammiya. But given the context, it came out more naturally to say أصبح than to say ba'a. And so I put ba'a between brackets after asbah to indicate that if I was speaking purely Ammiya, this is what I would use. The grammar issue I want to talk about after reading is the use of the passive form. So was done, was appointed, was elected, and so on. So anyway, let's get started and we'll talk more about this after the reading. محمد حسني مبارك اتولد يوم 4 مايو 1928 في قرية صغيرة في محافظة المنوفية شمال القاهرة. بعد ما خلص تعليمه الثانوي دخل الكلية الحربية وأخذ بكالوريوس في العلوم العسكرية، وبعدين بكالوريوس في العلوم الجوية سنة 1950. بعد كده مبارك كمل دراسته العليا في أكاديمية عسكرية في الاتحاد السوفيتي. في نوفمبر سنة 1967 اتعين مدير للكلية الجوية، وسنة 1972 اتعين قائد للقوات الجوية. بعد مشاركته في حرب أكتوبر 1973 اختاروا الرئيس المصري السابق أنور السادات نائب له. مبارك كان قاعد جنب الرئيس السادات وقت العرض العسكري يوم 6 أكتوبر 1981 لما المنصة العسكرية اتعرضت لهجوم اتقتل فيه السادات بينما نجي مبارك. وفي الشهر نفسه مبارك أصبح رئيس البلد. أعيد انتخابه كرئيس للبلد في سلسلة استفتاءات شعبية عليه كان هو فيها المرشح الوحيد. وفي سنة 2005 وبعد تعديل دستوري اتفتح باب الترشيح لقيادات الأحزاب وانتخب بنسبة كبيرة من أصوات الناخبين. خلال سنوات ولايته الخمسة اتعرض لضغوط داخلية متزايدة عشان يعمل إصلاحات سياسية واقتصادية، وزادت حدة المعارضة بعد انتخابات مجلس الشعب في نوفمبر 2010. وابتداء من 25 يناير 2011 مصر شهدت سلسلة مظاهرات ضخمة استمرت كذا يوم، وكان أشدها يوم 28 يناير اللي اتسمى جمعة الغضب، وانتهى بفرض حظر التجول ونزول الجيش شوارع القاهرة وكذا مدينة تانية. لكن يوم 11 فبراير مبارك اتخلى عن منصبه وكلف المجلس العسكري بإدارة شؤون البلاد. وبعد شهرين من تنحيه تم التحقيق مع مبارك في مكان إقامته في مدينة شرم الشيخ باتهامات متعلقة بقتل المتظاهرين واستغلال النفوذ ونهب المال العام. ويوم 2 يونيو 2012 حكمت محكمة جنايات القاهرة على مبارك بالسجن المؤبد لمسؤوليته عن قتل المتظاهرين، لكنه بعدها خد براءة من التهمة دي. I thought this text lends itself very well to looking at the passive form in Egyptian Arabic and how to form it, simply because the text contains so many examples, like he was born, he was appointed, he was elected, and so on. Now, if you've learned the passive form in the Fusha, you will have learned that usually what we do is we take the verb as it is in the active form and we just change the short vowels in a certain way that makes it passive. So the verb فعل becomes فعل, 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 فعل becomes فعل, افتعل, افتعل, استفعل, استفعل. So usually it's a matter of adding a dhamma in the first half and the kasra in the second half, and that creates the passive form. Another popular way of expressing the passive in Fusha is to use the verb tamma, was done, followed by the masdar. So instead of saying untukhiba, he was elected, we would say tamma intikhab, tamma intikhab, the election was done. Now, in Egyptian Arabic, a verb form was created to express the passive which doesn't actually exist in Fusha, and that is a form which is itfa'al, itfa'al. Okay, so if you're purely focusing on Fusha, this will sound very odd to you because you know ifta'ala, but you don't know itfa'al. Okay, this is very, very colloquial. Never say it in Fusha. And so let's look at the examples we have in our text. The very first word in the Fusha text is wulida, wulida Muhammad Hosny Mubarak, and in Egyptian Arabic that became itwalad, Muhammad Hosny Mubarak, itwalad. Okay, so we preserve the active form walad and we just precede it with it walad. Another example would be katab, he wrote. Was written would be it katab. Of course, in Fusha it's kutiba, Egyptian, it katab. Next example we have في نوفمبر عام 1967 عينا, عينا, that became it عين. Again, following the same principle, we took the verb عين and then we preceded it with it عين, it walad, it عين. Another example would be سلم, to submit, Egyptian سلم, the passive form is اتسلم, not سلم. Then we have another basic form which is قتل, to kill, became قتل in the Fusha, قتل, and in Egyptian Arabic اتقتل. And in the following paragraph في عام 2005 وبعد تعديل دستوري فتح, in formal Arabic فتح became اتفتح, اتفتح باب الترشيح. Same principle again. Now, you remember what I said at the beginning of this episode about how in certain contexts we do like to retain a certain level of Fusha. And this is exactly what I've done in the paragraph beginning with أعيد انتخابه. And this is very much a Fusha way of saying he was re-elected. Literally, it means his election was repeated. أعيد أعاد is to do something again. أعاد, and the passive form is أعيد. Now, if I was to use the Egyptian form of أعيد, I would have said اتعاد. أعيد انتخابه would have been اتعاد انتخابه. But like I said, there are certain occasions where it just doesn't sound natural to say it in pure عامية. And so it felt more appropriate to use the فصحى form أعيد انتخابه here. Other Egyptians may disagree with me, but I'm just saying what I would have said as an Egyptian. Similarly, in the same paragraph, we have the verb انتخب itself used in the passive انتخب. And here again, I also said انتخب in the Egyptian version. The verb افتعل has the passive form افتعل, and there actually does not exist a typical Egyptian way of forming the passive here. So other people may have said الناس انتخبته. People have elected him, and so we would just avoid the passive form altogether. So this was an option, but I chose to preserve the فصحى here. Again, similarly, in the penultimate paragraph beginning with وبعد شهرين من تنحيه, I said تم التحقيق. In the فصحى, it was تم التحقيق. This is actually something that is also quite commonly done in the عامية, to say تم followed by the masdar. So تم التحقيق, تم الامتحان, and so on. But another way of expressing that in Egyptian Arabic would have been to say اتحقق مع مبارك. So he was interrogated. اتحقق مع مبارك. In the blog, I added a table showing some of the verb forms and how they are used in the passive form in Fusha and in Masri, with some examples given. And I only gave 4 verb forms: فعل, فعل, فاعل, and أفعل. I did not include افتعل, استفعل, and some of the other forms that do exist in passive, because we do not have a specific Egyptian way of expressing it. Okay, I think I've talked a lot today. I hope you found this episode useful, and please do check the Instagram account. I think you'll find it quite entertaining, although at the moment there's just 5 clips, but I will be adding some more regularly. Okay, thank you, and see you next time.